So the topics for today's webinar are the definition of project management, task management. I'll show you guys the new project Gantt chart and talk a little bit high level about Microsoft Project Connector, the new project budget feature, and the bulk task wizard. Okay. So, first and foremost, when you think about project management, a lot of the time the old adage comes to mind, on time, on budget, right? And I look at project management, while there are a lot of different aspects and different methodologies that folks use, three key things are your budgeted hours for your project, your activities within that project, so your tasks or discrete activities within that project, and then managing the budget for that project. Okay, those are the three big items when you talk about project management. Well, in OpenAir, kind of the high-level flow usually is you have your project, you create that project in OpenAir. So whether that project is created via interface from NetSuite or interface from Salesforce or some other system, or it's directly created in OpenAir, basically you have a project, you open that project in OpenAir. You can use templates. I know a lot of folks use a standard template to apply information directly into that project to save them time on data entry, on the data entry side. So for the project properties, information can transfer over from the standard template. What you do next is you usually look at your project properties, and that houses some of the overall information for the project. So if you're using a template, you can go through and validate the information that's defaulted by the template. And for other things, maybe if you're doing it directly in OpenAir, opening a project, then you want to enter that project name or other information that needs to be specifically input for that project. Next, you move on to the phase and task creation. So a lot of folks will definitely use tasks. Most people, some people use both phases and tasks. I tend to err on the keeping it simple side so that it's easy to manage and you're not spending a lot of your time administering this tool. You're spending more of your time managing what you need to on the project and your client needs and so forth. Next, you have the option to create a budget, or there is a new budget feature that we'll take a look at, and that's called project budgets. And you can also have the option of creating baselines. And baseline is a snapshot in time of the project. It just captures whatever you have initially slated in that phase and task plan. That's what your baseline will capture. You can have multiple baselines. We'll get into that a little bit more later. After that is all done and your resources have been assigned, folks can enter time, of course, against the project. Typically, reporting starts after people have set up the project and entered time, because a lot of folks from a project management standpoint are looking at how that project is tracking. So you're doing a comparison of budget versus hours, whether that is cost to cost, whether that is hours to hours comparison, however your organization sees fit to manage. That's usually when reporting comes into play. I know there are a lot of other features. Some of you may be using bookings. So you set up everything in the projects piece, and if you're doing bookings in the resource module, you'll move on to entering your bookings for the project. Or you also may be doing invoicing out of OpenAir. There are a lot of other aspects. We're not going to touch too much on bookings today because resource management's a heavy topic, so it's its own webinar. Okay, so this is kind of the high-level view for project management. So when you think about the budget, hours budget, you can budget at the project level where you assign resources to the project. If you have tasks, any resources assigned at the project level will have ability to see post time to any of the tasks. So it's just really the highest level. Then you have a task level. So let's say you have a discrete activity. You have content development, for example, and you have 3 people that are working on content development. You can identify hours for that overall task. How long is that task going to take? And then all the people will share the hours across that task. The next level down, the most granular level, is by person, by task. So Within the task, you'll assign the resources and you will assign hours for each resource. So this is where, let's say you have that same task, you have content development, but somebody is drafting the content, someone else is reviewing the content, and you want to specify the certain hours it's going to take for each of those people, right, within that activity. So that's where you have the more granular levels. It really depends on your business need. The other thing is the features that are available. So baselines, as I had mentioned a little bit, they capture the task and person dimension. Hours budget can be done at task, person, or project level. And the new project budget feature is pretty much at your project or task level. It doesn't go down to that person level. Okay. So planned hours at the task level. I often run into clients where they may be assigning, there's a switch in the system, and they may be assigning resource hours because they weren't aware that they could just plan at this task level. They don't need that extra level, and it's quicker and easier for them to just plan, here's the total hours I need for this task. Now, you lose visibility to how many hours does each person have, because when you plan at the task level, you're basically spreading those hours evenly across anyone who's assigned there, because you're not allocating them out specifically. The timing with a task plan is driven by this percent of users' time. So, for example, in our system we have 8 hours a day, so 100% would mean I would work 8 hours in one day. If this said 50%, it would be 4 hours one day, 4 hours the next day, so it would take me 2 days. You can also enable end dates. And some of you are probably already using that if you use assignments for forecasting because you want to forecast between a specific start and end dates. It is a nice feature that we like to use, and it basically just says, here's the timeline I want these hours spread across. Okay? So other than just having a start date and letting the system calculate, you can override that by adding an end date. Next is the reporting considerations for this. So keep in mind, you're really going to report at a task level when you look at this. You can do some custom calculations to say, to look at those project planned hours, and it can roll up, obviously, to that project level. But that's the most granular you really are going to get if you want more granular information. So the next step down would be this task resource level. And that, like in my example earlier, so I have content development. I have someone drafting the content. I expect that person to spend 10 hours. I have someone reviewing the content. I expect that person to spend 2 hours. And then I have another person making updates or adding other input. And so I want to give each of these people hours. And I want to refine, and I want to say, here's how much I think it's going to cost. This is what I thought of when I was estimating the project. So I add my assignment within my task. I add my resource. And then I put in the planned hours for each of the resources. That then rolls up to the total task planned hours. So the task plan hours in this situation isn't an input field. You input at the actual resource level. A little bit more detailed allows you, if you want to look at, assigned hours versus actual hours, because people will have different assigned hours versus that even spread, and still use that start and end date with this, which is nice. Just so you know, this is an internal switch, so you have to have this enabled through support. This task level resource hours at the task level. So if you don't see it or you have some questions, it could be that you need to contact support and have that enabled. So those are just kind of the different levels. Now, keep in mind, with this, you want to decide what do you want to report on, what makes sense for you, because this resource level is more administration. Time might move, and then you have to come in and change things on the task. People might be swapped in and out, or someone uses more. You're managing at that user level, so you're going to change hours maybe at that user level or make adjustments at that level. So if you don't feel that you're going to use that in your organization, then you want to really look at what makes the most sense for the most benefit, right? Because you don't want to overburden folks. And for this, you can do custom calculations down at that assignments level, okay? So just in OpenAir, when you're talking about hours, the planned hours are the assigned hours. It's interesting because I know in different screens you have different naming conventions. Like in reports, it'll be called assigned hours, but when you look at your list view in projects, it's called planned hours. So the planned hours are your assigned hours. There's this other concept of estimated hours, and I see a lot that this is causing confusion, or people don't even realize that this is actually on in their system. The estimated hours, if you have the hours remaining field, you'll have the hours remaining field in your timesheet. So basically what happens is when someone goes and enters time, there's a project, they have their task, and then they can input a number into this hours remaining field, and that is the incremental hours that they expect to complete this task. So what that then does is the hours remaining, if you have this estimate switch enabled, the hours remaining will be added to your approved hours, and your estimate to complete that task will be your approved hours plus those hours remaining. If this is enabled, then you have this little box on your task form, which you will say, what happens is instead of for percent complete, your percent complete is going to be calculated based on your approved over your estimate, over your estimated hours. So I've often seen a lot of folks where they're like, why is my percent complete off? This doesn't make sense. What's going on? I have to manually adjust these things outside in Excel. What in the world happened? Why doesn't this work? We can't figure it out. Typically, that's because people are expecting the percent to be complete to be calculated as approved over planned. What's actually happening is it's being calculated as approved over estimated. So that can cause big shifts. So for example, in my example here, my approved over my planned, well, I'm over. So that's an issue. But you're going to have this is going to be over 100%, and this is going to be under 100%, right, from a percent complete standpoint, because they're two significantly different figures. So if you are downloading or looking at any percent completes and downloading the list view to use for client status or anything of that nature, that just make sure, and you're not understanding what's going on, if you see this hours remaining estimate in your task form, it's very likely, and try backing into the calculation, it's very likely that what's happening is your percent complete calculating as approved over estimated. Okay? So next, we talk about the new project Gantt chart. So this Gantt view is neat. It allows you to do some drag and drop to update the project plan. It also, in the outline view, allows inline editing. Now, there's only specific fields such as start date, your task name, things like that, that can be edited. However, this also requires an internal switch, so if you see this and you can't do any edits, you want to contact support and make sure that they enable that switch for you. Phases and tasks can be created from here. It's really pretty useful. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and I will show you this in the system, one thing to keep in mind is that for those of you that use the booking chart, when you use the booking chart and you use the drag and drop feature, what happens is you can basically do some scenario modeling, for example. And then it's not saved until you hit save. With the Gantt chart view, what happens is when you modify a timeline and pull this over, it automatically saves it and it refreshes your screen. So it's definitely real time, but it functions a bit differently than the drag and drop in other modules within the system, and that could cause confusion. And you just want to make sure, are you comfortable with moving things around? Maybe do you have this baseline, or do you have your project plan? Are you comfortable moving things and then shifting them back, things of that nature? Okay, so that's just one thing to keep in mind with this Gantt view. All right, I was going to show everyone, but I'm having a technical difficulty, so I apologize for that. I apologize. We'll just have to look at it here. So essentially, it's like the Salesforce functionality, you drag drop, or like the booking. It's just the big difference is that it actually saves and refreshes real time. Okay. And next, kind of in line with that new Gantt view and drag and drop ability in the Gantt chart, is folks often look at wonder about this Microsoft Project Connector. And this is to help link Microsoft Project and OpenAir, Microsoft Project Plans and OpenAir. So there's two key parts to the Project Connector. It's the project plan, which is your structure, your tasks, and the project tracking, which is an end user input. So it's your timesheet. People put in timesheets, it's OpenAir only. So that's kind of an easy way to think about those two pieces. So your project plan, it can be built either in OpenAir or in MS Project. It doesn't matter. However, the big thing to keep in mind is you have to decide where do you want to manage this. A lot of folks, when I get questions about using this Project Connector in Microsoft Project, a lot of folks want to say they want to manage in both places. Well, maybe I want to do this. Maybe if I'm in OpenAir, I'll just fix it in OpenAir. Maybe if I'm in my Microsoft Project, I'll fix it in Microsoft Project. Or, different project managers want to do it different ways. It's really important to decide how you're going to do this. What system is going to be the system that you're going to use? Because what happens is if you manage this in both places, there is often data duplication, data discrepancy issues, because you're doing things in two different places and trying to push them back and forth. So that's the real big thing to remember when you're looking at using this Microsoft Project Connector. So the connector, what it does is it allows you to push a project plan to OpenAir. You can set predecessors from Microsoft Project, push it into OpenAir. If you're going to maintain it in Microsoft Project, you can lock it in OpenAir so that you can't update any of the tasks. You can't do anything, but it is there for you to view. If you're going to manage it in OpenAir, you can leave it unlocked. And you can also pull a project from OpenAir and make modifications in Microsoft Project if that's where you're going to manage it. And you can populate your task assignment. Scheduling conflicts will appear so that you can make those changes. You can pull time from OpenAir into Microsoft Project, because OpenAir should be where all of the time, the timesheet data, time is entered, time is kept. So if you're managing your project and your tasks in OpenAir, what you're going to want to keep in mind is start and end dates in Microsoft Project will cause what's called a hard start and end date in OpenAir. So you want to blank out these dates, because what happens is these hard start and end dates, if something shifts in OpenAir and you shift timeline, or you're using predecessors and you move a couple tasks forward, the new finish date won't calculate, because it basically, the hard line is that it's a hard date, so it won't let anything calculate, so your timeline will be skewed. So you want to make sure that you blank out those dates, or if, for those of you who are using it and have that issue, that the issue is that Microsoft Project is driving these hard date figures. For tasks that are assigned to clients, you want to create them as milestones in Microsoft Project so they can be managed as milestones in OpenAir. Just a tip. It's much easier from a management standpoint that way. If you are managing the project in Microsoft Project, OpenAir, the project can be pulled into Microsoft Project, or it can be created in Microsoft Project and pushed to OpenAir. But basically, you'll want to pull this either weekly or ad hoc when adjustments need to be made, so you can manage it, pull it out of OpenAir and manage it inside of Microsoft Project. This is when it would be locked so that you can't make those updates. Usually, well, the time is in OpenAir only, and you can pull that time, of course, at any point into Microsoft Project for reporting and review. Okay. The next thing, this is a new feature. So we are currently, TopStep is currently testing out this new project budgets feature. New. This, we are not positive, we haven't received all the information, so we're not positive that it'll be in the new release. Sometimes there are features that actually don't make it into the new release. It's supposed to be part of the new release, so we're in the process of testing this. And it's called Project Budgets. So in the same, within the project, under Financial is the same place that you would find the budget feature, if some of you are currently using that. Now there's this new Project Budget. The Project Budget allows you to create a budget over a period of time. And you can do that either by project or by task. Once you decide, I want to do my budget by project, it's project level, or at the task level, you can't change that. So once you pick what you're doing and hit save, you can't make any changes. So that's just something to note. And the categories that will be available for you to budget within depend on what you're using in the system. And what I mean by that is, so when you create a project budget at the project level, you pick your project, you hit save, you can add an overall planned hours figure or planned dollars figure. Then what happens is this screen for budget opens up, right? And you have a budget and it has categories. So your expenses, when your subcategory for expenses, when you go to add the actual budget figures, are the expense items. Labor, it's the services. And as you see, I see purchases here because we're using the purchases module. And if I want to add a subcategory for purchases to budget in, those will be the products that I have identified in the purchases module, so that I've set up an administration for purchases. The project budget feature, so you can budget by month, as you see here, February and March. You can budget by week, or you can budget by quarter. Those are your options. So it gives you that ability to budget over time. Once you add you have, here for units, you can have money or hours. The interesting thing is you probably want to keep it as money because what it does with hours is it's not actually budgeting in hours. It's showing you money and hours, really. That's what happens, and I'll show you that in our next screenshot. So let's say we want to create a subcategory for professional services. We want to create a budget by month for professional services, so labor hours, labor dollars and hours. So what I can do is I click on this Add New, and then I scroll through to my labor, and I pick, this is one of the services that I have set up. I pick that. You can do hours times a rate, and it will calculate. You can make this non-periodical, so basically it just enters it for one, whatever time period you have based on the date you have here. Or you can do it monthly and have a start and end date, weekly, daily. And you can add notes. This is really only handy when we talk about change orders. I'll talk about that in a minute. But that's how you would create the budget. Now, from here, you can do some inline editing. So you have 1,500, maybe you want to change that because that March should be now 2,000 or something of that nature. You can literally do some inline editing directly here in the screen. The issue that I do see is that you can only use these subcategories once. So if this is a fixed fee, it's fine because usually you have your fixed fee milestones if they're based on date or deliverable, whatever they may be based on, and you can say, okay, February I'm going to bill 5,000, March I'm going to bill 10,000, and you can lay out your budget that way. Very simple. However, if it's T&M, It's a little bit more complicated because you almost have to calculate your budget by month outside of the system. Because what it's doing here is it's only letting you have one line item. So most of the T&M projects, you have different hours at different rates that build up your entire budget. So that can be a challenge that I see. The other thing is it doesn't bring over any of the assignments from the tasks that you have or hours. It doesn't calculate based on the billing rules. This is purely a more elaborate version of the current budget feature to allow you to budget over time. It's really input. It's data input centric. Okay. So the next is this task budget. So this is a good illustration of I have a project. I've set up all these tasks on my project, and now I choose to budget by task. So as you see, it'll give you every single category to create a budget within each task. So I can create my labor budget for this build task. I can create a labor budget for test. I can, and so on and so forth. When you click to save, you have to save your budget. When you click to save, it'll show you what changes you're saving, which is a nice feature. The thing, though, that I have noticed is here basically the inline editing is helpful here, and you still have the same issues. So here you've already input all your assigned hours in your task plan. None of it carries over. So there's no way to carry over, okay, I have all these hours, it should calculate by my billing rule, I've done all that, and then it should populate. That's not the system's functionality currently. So I just want to make that clear to folks. It's just more entry. So I guess it depends. If you want to do a budget over time, you have to think through what do you want to report on, what makes most sense for your organization, and how much administrative burden can you handle, or do you want to take on to get the result that you're going to get. The last thing that's interesting about this feature, this is the thing I find really the most interesting, is you see we have this budget tab, that's what we were just looking at, and then we have actuals. So after you enter your budget, you can click on actuals and it will pull in your planned versus your approved or submitted or all actuals, right? So it's a plan versus actuals for your budget and any expenses or timesheets that have been, I have it set to approve. So it's a nice quick view within the project without having to build a report to go look and see, okay, great, here's where my project is. So you can use that monthly, weekly, quarterly, whatever you would like to do. So I think that's a really, really nice feature. That's probably the biggest gain you're going to get, and that's where you look at, does it make sense to go down to that task level, or is this fine? As a quick look, is it fine to do my budget at that project level? The differences between your project budget and the budget feature is the project budget provides the granularity and the ability to budget over time. The budget feature that a lot of you may use currently it's really kind of a high level. You can identify it by different services or budget categories, but you kind of go, okay, here's my fee budget, lump sum. Here's my expense budget, lump sum. The one nice thing is that budget, when you fill out your budget line items, that populates the budget and project properties. The project budget doesn't seem to do that. And so a little bit odd, you can add a planned budget, but it doesn't seem to default into project properties. So more data input pieces that you have to make sure are aligned. The nice thing also about the budget feature is that I have a lot of folks that use it to easily identify change orders. So here was my initial budget, here's the budget that I got from a change order, right? And you can do that very easily because you can call the budget line item change order. It's very simple to call out. It's very simple to understand what changed. Re-baseline, look at that, and you understand that all ties together to a change order. So the project budget, one of the ways that I thought through of handling that change order piece is if you create a new task for the change order. I know some folks, that's how they manage change orders. They create a new task, and then they add, the hours that they respectively are going to need to that task. Well, if you're budgeting at the task level, then you can come and you can take that change order task and you can add your budget to each of the categories. And that will then, the task will be named change order or whatever your naming convention may be, but that's an easy way to call it out. The other thing is if you're going to do it from, if you don't do that and you want to, add the additional fees, it's not a discrete activity, you don't want to create a new task. It's more money for content development because you didn't get it finished. Or they added scope or something of that nature. Usually it's an add scope. It typically gives more money because we had a bad estimate. But regardless, you can use the notes field and then a little notes icon will pop up. But it's not as easy to call it out in that project budget feature because you're either using a notes field or you have to identify it in a task. So it's something to keep in mind there. Those are really the differences. So I guess it depends on what do you need? What do you need to measure against? How, does your organization have a need to do that budget over time? I have some clients who have been waiting and waiting for this because they want to budget over time. They have a specific, revenue or billing schedule, and they want to make sure that that's inside OpenAir. Other people, it's just not that important. So it really depends on your need, and to keep in mind, there's a lot of administration. For this feature, if you have a sandbox, I would definitely take a look at this in your sandbox before implementing it. Same with the Gantt chart because, with a Gantt chart, you're saving things. With the project budget, you just want to get used to it. And in production, you pick one way, a project or task, and then you're kind of stuck. So either do it in a test project, something, or in a sandbox is really while you're learning how to use that feature. All right, the next piece is baselines. A lot of folks don't use baselines, maybe because they're not quite sure what it means, or they just haven't looked at the functionality. But baselines are nice. They're very simple. And you can go in, you click create a new baseline, and what it does is takes a snapshot of your tasks, your planned hours, your resource assignments for that given time period. So you can have multiple baselines. Only one can be your reporting baseline, and that's typically your last saved baseline. But you can select whatever baseline you want to be your reporting baseline. You can compare baselines against each other. And the way to enable baselines is in your project stage, there's a checkbox for baselines, so you can enable it within in administration project settings, and then in project stages. So, for example, here I have two baselines, and I did a report to compare these baselines. So basically, what this is saying is, I had $24,000. My budget increased is a delta of $10,000. Obviously, this is a test project. I know that seems odd from a day standpoint. The really nice thing, though, about these baselines and the snapshot ability is, for those of you that use this task list view, when you're looking at your projects and you're in that phase and task list view, outline view, you can customize that view to add a baseline. So this project, for example, I have planned errors, I have approved, I have estimated, and then I have a baseline. The baseline is literally that point in time that will never change. So if I were to say, there is the ability to say, okay, my budget's way off. What I planned is way off. Here, what I need to do now is use what I have estimated as my plan. So I click the hyperlink that allows me to update my plan based on what I have in my estimate. What you don't want to lose visibility to what your baseline is. So you want to make sure that you capture your plan as your baseline, and then you have whatever baseline you want to report against, but you'll always have that data. Then once you update based on your estimate, you're not losing anything. So it's not like you have to go and download files and save them to remember what was it, what is it now, what happened, that kind of thing. It will be captured in this baseline functionality. So I think that's really the nice thing about using baselines. And it's pretty much, 2 clicks. You name the baseline, and you name the baseline, you add maybe 2 fields of information, and you're done. It's a very, very simple process. So if you feel like it's needed, we can dive more into that. It's a really nice feature to use in the system, and a lot of folks are not using it. All right. Next is this bulk task change wizard. This wizard isn't new. There's 2 wizards. There's 2 wizards outside of the American Express upload thing. But the bulk change wizard is the task wizard, and then there's a bulk user change wizard. So the task change wizard allows you to copy information from a task. So let's say you finish assignments on one task, and maybe your next task in that project is going to have the same assignment. So I can identify the project, I can identify the task that I want to copy from, and I can identify what I want to copy. So from my build task, I'm going to have the same people on my design task. So I'm going to pick assignments. I am going to select that. I'm going to click next. Then I'm going to go my step 2. I'm going to go and I'm going to decide what task do I want to copy to, and that's what I'm going to do. Nice thing, you can make tasks non-billable, you can close tasks, you can change dates. So if you have to replicate a lot of data across tasks, this makes it really easy to do within a project. So I know some folks have a really hefty task structure, so this might be really, really handy if your start date shifts across everything or something of that nature. So it's a nice feature there. The other wizard is the bulk user change wizard. And that is you make an adjustment to a user and you can copy it to all other users, or if you use departments, you can copy it to different departments. An example of that I use a lot is some people like to set up specific list views. So list views within, their project stages, or list views just throughout the system, and when they look, they want everyone to have the same view, or at least start from the same view, because when you're sharing screens or someone's helping to train people, they're going, well, how come I see this and you see this? So you can copy those list views to a number of different users or users within your department if it's department specific. So it's really a real quick way to update information, and the user change wizard is across users. On the task change wizard, it's within a project and a task. Okay. So the last thing I want to touch on is reporting. I think most of you probably know this, but within the reports there's a little checkbox, and you can say project-specific report, and that will allow you to put the report on the project dashboard. So you can create a number of standard reports that you want folks to use for project management, and then when you check the little box, they'll show up on that person's project dashboard, so you can run it for the specific project directly from that project dashboard. When you're doing that, you want to make sure that when you're setting up those reports, just some things to keep in mind. Ensure that they're not filtered on a project, because otherwise people are going to run it and they're not going to get any information. Ensure the report's project-based, because you're looking at it from a project standpoint. And a couple other things around reporting. If you can and you have an extra license or a user, something available, you might want to have a report owner that owns all of the reports. And the reason is because if someone specifically owns reports, they have to keep in mind that if they go into the report that they own and they're using that report and maybe they collapse or expand rows, they collapse rows, the next person that runs it is going to see it collapsed. And it tends to cause confusion if people aren't really versed in the system and going, oh, well, it just must have been collapsed. Someone thinks, hey, I'm missing data for one row, or, what happened? Why does this report look different? So it causes some noise and just confusion. And you don't want to have people confused like that, because then it's taking away from the focus of what you really need to do in your daily job, which isn't worry about the tool administration. It's actually manage your projects. So just a thought, if you have anything available, I would make those reports owned by a specific report owner, or let your whoever owns the reports just make sure they're aware of that, because that's a big thing that causes problems amongst folks. The typical reports that I see created are your assigned hours versus your actual hours. I always do actual approved. It's just my personal default, but you can, of course, do all actual hours that captures anything in a timesheet, however you're looking to measure it, and then typically create a custom calculation that does, that shows the delta, and even, your percentage of actual over assigned. Project budget versus actual, same thing, you can create that delta. And then the project profitability. Those are kind of my three standard project management reports. So my assigned versus actual, as you say, so I have people assigned down to a user level. So you can see in my report, you say the project, the task, and the user, and then the timesheet approved hours and the delta and the variance to assigned, right, which is just the delta. Sometimes I think it gets a bit kludgy with all of these levels, so you're not quite sure what to focus on. I usually like to keep it, at most 3, but like 2, 3, depending on what are you trying to get from the report, and just personal opinion. And for the project budget, I just wanted to show that you can create reports based on that project budget feature, and you can do labor, and you can do your labor budget against the fees that you've billed. You can do expenses budgeted against expenses that have been billed, just a couple different ways to know that you can use that project budget feature in reporting. Just want to make sure that I showed that. And then your project profitability, which I did this one based on invoices. Some folks do this if you're using both revenue and billing. A typical P&L is, revenue minus cost, but it really depends. With this, you can also do your budgeted. I know a lot of PMs will manage on hours and cost. So what's my budgeted cost versus what is my cost spend to date. So this is just kind of your standard more P&L deal. And I did project and user. A lot of people just do this at the project level, just for a quick, what's my margin on my project, because that's really what you're looking for. Also with a margin percentage, because you're kind of looking at a specific target. I know a lot of services projects will target, around the 35% mark. So they want to make sure that their projects are running on track, or if they aren't, find out why in a quick view. So that's really it. In summary, keep in mind your data is only as good as the management of it. So keep it simple as you can, and with as much data as you need to reduce any burden on tool management. When you're looking at your project task management, decide what makes sense for your organization and do it at different levels. Just look at having that define and decide what makes sense. The Microsoft Project Connector, if you really do want to sync your Microsoft Project Plan with OpenAir, you can use this Project Connector. Just keep in mind there are a few nuances and decisions that need to be made so that you can get the best benefit and you don't have any concerns about that data duplication piece. Our new Gantt chart, the flexibility it provides, the new budget feature, it's really just the nice thing about budgeting across time. And as you move forward, just look at revisiting your approach. As your organization evolves, there may be, top steps as the release management. There may be things in releases that as your business evolves, you might want to get implemented, you might want to learn about. So the release management feature is really nice. We write up notes and issues on the releases as they come to give people some information so that they don't have to go through releases themselves. We do the testing and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. And as always, you can visit our website. We have our webinars up, other information about Top Steps, our LinkedIn group, and so forth. So